Hi everybody, welcome to Shivers and Merry Christmas Eve. Every year we do this presentation on the folklore of Christmas, both as an event and as podcast episode. So kind of crazy that this is year 4 of offering this, but if you missed the presentation and are interested in the folklore of Christmas, this one is going to be for you. So we are going to jump right in to the actual presentation. I'm looking back and forth for those of you actually watching on YouTube. I do have an actual presentation of this, so if you're interested in having it almost as like a download, just let me know and I'll send it to you. But I always start the folklore of Christmas by talking about the history of Halloween. A lot of links between the history of Halloween and the folklore of Christmas, especially when we're talking about the core groups that really brought it to life. So the Celtics, the Druids, the Pagans, the Scottish, and the Puritans. These are all people who have some sort of tie and history to Halloween itself. For the Celtics, they are the people who we really represent the most for Halloween, the most modern version of Halloween. They called it Samhain. They celebrate it on October 31st, and this is all focused on the harvest day, the end of the sun's season. So what you'll start to see with not only the history of Halloween, but also the folklore of Christmas is the idea that so much of these celebrations are rooted in earth, are rooted in thank you for this bountiful season and gratitude for a year of harvest ahead. So a lot of things like that are very focused on growth, earth, appreciation for growth, all of that things. So for the Celtics, they are really the trendsetters of this. They're focusing on Halloween being the end of the harvest season, the appreciation for the sun. They are also kind of crazy. They did sacrifice criminals or people who would truly pull the short straw as this like dedication to the sun. So basically anybody who was bad or unlucky, you're gone on Halloween. They were also the first group of people to wear costumes as disguises. So this is really where we get the core of trick-or-treating from. Trick-or-treating though, the actual term trick-or-treat, did not come until the 1940s in a Peanuts comic book. A comic strip, excuse me. And this is the very first time that America specifically ever heard the word trick or treat. So for the pagans, they really focused on Halloween, they called it Halloween, and the celebration of the death of the sun's season. For the Scottish, this is where things get kind of crazy. They also called it Halloween, but they held a bonfire for witches. So they would say that anybody who was wandering the streets at night was a witch. Anybody who was born on Halloween was evil and had powers. Any child that went missing on Halloween was taken by fairies. So a lot of like assumptions and just overall bad luck for the day. This lasted from October 31st in the evening to November 1st in the evening. So a full 24 hours of hell for the poor Scottish people. For the Puritans, this was all about the coming of witches. So we have the Puritans and the Scottish who really used this holiday as almost an excuse to get rid of witches. So the Puritans banned people from being outside all on Halloween because they feared that the actual witches would be the only people who are out there and they would kill these poor patrons. So the Puritans today don't celebrate Halloween. Even back then they didn't celebrate it, but it was more of an acknowledgement that all of these belief systems, all of these backgrounds did believe that Halloween was this thinning of the veil. So when we move on to Christmas, folklore of Christmas in particular, I'm going to really touch on the folklore of like Christmas itself, Saturnalia, Yule. So this of course does not include like Hanukkah or any more rooted in religion traditions. Again, this is true folklore. So Christmas, I'll just read it directly for you, used to be called Saturnalia. So you'll see Saturnalia, Yule, and Christmas a lot. Saturnalia was really focused on this ancient Roman celebration, also stemmed with the pagans. So they would honor the agricultural god Saturn, and this was a week-long lawless celebration. Think a week-long purge between December 17th and the 25th, where no one could be prosecuted for killing, doing horrible things, theft, anything you can imagine. Because of when the holiday occurred near the winter solstice, Saturnalia celebrations became the source of many of the traditions we now associate with Christmas. such as wreaths, candles, and feasting. Saturnalia was officially banished as a holiday and absorbed into Christmas in 336 AD by Pope Julius I to honor both Jesus and Saturn in one holiday. So this is why you don't really hear a lot about Saturnalia, because it was just kind of sucked up by Christmas itself. For gift giving, we did get this from Saturnalia. Schools were closed and criminals were allowed to run rampant throughout the purge, so the wealthy were encouraged to give gifts to the poor in order to avoid robbery. Kind of bribery, but also just being nice, like forced volunteer work in a way. So, down the chimney, in terms of continuing on why we honor these traditions. The Scottish and English legends tell of a helpful household spirit that enters and exits a home at night through the chimney. In the Middle Ages, witches were also thought to pass into homes through the chimneys. In Greece, goblins were known to crawl into homes through the chimney and terrorize the families within. In America, goblins slipped down chimneys to reward good children with oranges and punish naughty ones with a whip. These goblins would watch the families throughout the year and make their judgment on the solstice. Thus, the tradition of good or bad news floating down the chimney really stuck with Santa, or that naughty or nice. For the Christmas tree, this is probably the most known piece of folklore. This is the idea that really stemmed from the Egyptians. So when we're talking about an appreciation for nature and the world, the Egyptians were really at the forefront of all of that, with Christmas tree in particular. So during any of the cold months, they would bring these green plants in, anything that was evergreen, anything that was holly, anything that was pine. And they are said to really show like inside the home is still growing and earthly and hearthly, instead of how dead it is outside. I don't know necessarily how true this is for Egypt. I don't know the weather in Egypt back in the day, but this was really the idea that the Egyptians were saying, like, just because it's dim and dark outside, it's still lively in here, so please bless us with continuing a bountiful harvest, lust for life, all of that. The other side of the Christmas trees is more from the Celtics and the Druids, those people that we really follow for Halloween. They would bring these pine trees specifically inside and adorn them with all of these pieces of food in order to feed and appease the earth spirits that might be residing inside the tree that are brought inside from the cold. The idea of also having the star at the top of the tree is to represent all of the elements. So again, it's just so rooted in earth and appreciation for the world and gratitude and protection and all of that. For hanging stockings, in the early 1800s, people would hang their socks and stockings over the fireplace to dry. One night on Christmas Eve, it's said that St. Nicholas came down the chimney and dropped pieces of gold on his way, being placed into stockings as he climbed out. Since then, people of all ages have been hanging stockings for St. Nick in hopes that he will slip in some gold. Christmas caroling is where we get a little bit interesting. So as we were talking about that week-long purge, this is really where it was sort of inspired from. So carolers were often poor people or homeless people who would target wealthy people's homes. They would sing and they would distract the owners, and then a few of them would run around back to rob the house. So Christmas caroling is not as innocent as it is today. For the mistletoe, another one that is very well known, this is that plant of truce. This is, especially in wartime, really where a lot of military people would just drop your weapons. This is a sign of truce. This is where we're going to make peace. So this is really what the mistletoe is all about. And then in terms of Yule. So as I mentioned from Saturnalia, a little bit more of like that God side of things. Yule is what a lot of people will assimilate with, like when you immediately think of the folklore of Christmas, you immediately think of Yule. So Yule is said to start on the solstice on December 21st, and this has been celebrated since 1425. So today, many pagans, we're back to the pagans, celebrate Yule on the day of the winter solstice. Pagans celebrate the rebirth of the sun through gift exchanges, merriment, and deep spiritual reflection. This is a time of new beginnings, rebirth, transformation, joy, and getting rid of any unwanted habits. As Christianity swept through the European nations, the Yuletide celebrations were absorbed into Christmas, which is where we get New Year's resolutions and where we even get the term Merry Christmas from. So, there are also called the 12 days of Yule. So, From December 20th to January 1st, these are the 12 days of Yule. It is considered a sacred period and called Yuletide, belonging to neither the old year nor the new. It's a time to set intentions, celebrate, and keep vibrations high, giving us the phrase of making spirits bright. Now, you've probably heard of me talk about the Wheel of the Year before. The Wheel of the Year is really rooted in metaphysics, but when we're studying the Wheel of the Year, Yule is recognized on there. The idea that the new year doesn't start until spring because we're in alignment with more of the earth. We're celebrating the spring season as the kickoff to the new year. Yule then just becomes this period of very deep self-reflection. So it's not really New Year's resolutions, but it is still the same principle there. So now we get on to what everybody thinks of when we think about folklore, and that is, of course, Krampus and Santa. So for Santa, this is rooted in St. Nicholas. So there is enough evidence to say that St. Nicholas was at some point in time here on Earth. St. Nicholas was supposedly a kind monk who traveled from town to town dispersing his wealth to children and to those in need. After his death, the townsfolk honored and celebrated him on December 6th each year by giving gifts and toys to children in his name. In 1770, a Dutch family immigrated to America and brought their celebratory traditions with them and a wood carving of St. Nicholas as a round, white-haired man, spreading Sinterklaas, or St. Nicholas in Dutch, directly to English as Santa Claus, to Americans. In 1822, the well-known tale "'Twas the Night Before Christmas" was written, giving magical powers to the Santa figure flying with reindeer going down the chimney. In 1840, the first commercialized Santa was created and displayed at a shopping mall in Philadelphia, bringing people from all over to see the character while also being encouraged to do some shopping. It wasn't until 1940, much more recent than you would expect, and also the same time frame as trick-or-treating, that the story of Rudolph was born, taking the story of reindeer and accounting for the need for light. Thus, the Christmas we know today was truly born. So, St. Nicholas was said to have an evil counterpart. This is the idea of a creature named Krampus. Krampus is supposed to be a half-man, half-goat creature that was conjured by the pagans on the solstice. So, on that day of Yule, we have a lot of reflections. We have maybe all of this anger that we then channel into creating something. This is really the core of Krampus. The lore of Krampus started in Austria. This was the idea that now on the night of December 5th, the day before all the good of St. Nicholas, good children would receive presents from St. Nick and bad children would be snatched by Krampus, waking on December 6th to find goodies or find themselves trapped in hell. In Austria, Krampusnacht was born. This is the night where parents would dress as Krampus to scare their children into behaving. This custom still exists today in Austria and Germany, and Americans did not become aware of it or the Krampus traditions until 2004. There is also an annual Krampus parade, which is called Krampuslauf, and that takes place all over Austria, Germany, but the really headquarters of it is in South Tyrol, which is kind of in between there. There's a couple of videos online from a town called Bauf, B-A-U-F, where they do have a lot of Krampus traditions and parades as well. Their costumes can go all the way up to $5,000. There's a Krampus museum in Austria with a lot of these really well done costumes and parade attendees. So there's a lot of money that's spent to honor and celebrate Krampus and Krampus traditions. So just to kind of give a recap for the actual background of all of this stuff, the Celtics and Druids, they really focus more on Yule and Yuletide. The pagans do both Christmas and Yule. Christmas only because of Saturnalia. For the Scottish, they do celebrate Christmas, but instead of cookies that we have as our normal tradition, they make mince pies, and they also celebrate Father Christmas rather than Santa or St. Nicholas. More of a, I don't want to say ethereal, but kind of ethereal figure. And then the Puritans, kind of the same thing as Halloween. They're no fun. They used to celebrate Yuletide, but then they banned it, so they have no holiday celebrations. So the only other thing that I really want to mention is this idea of what's called the wild hunt. So this is more rooted in storytelling rather than actual folklore, which is why I'm always hesitant to add it a little bit. But this is really where we get some of the paranormal during this time. So the pagan traditions included a belief in a ghostly procession across the sky known as the Wild Hunt. Many people believed that any fog that appeared during the cold months was not weather, but rather a group of spirits traveling together. So it's this idea that between Halloween and between spring, the spring equinox, we have this dark period. We have this time of reflection. We have the veil that is still thin. We have a lot of resting. During this rest, we're now able to be quiet enough to see what's going on kind of that parallel line. So this is really where the Wild Hunt comes into play. There's lots and lots of stories about the Wild Hunt if you're interested in that in particular. But other than that, I just gave you a very long presentation summed up into about 15 minutes. So if you're interested in hearing more, let me know. But otherwise, I hope you have an amazing Christmas. Almost said Halloween, but I hope you have an amazing Christmas, Merry Christmas Eve, and whatever you celebrate, have a happy holiday season.